underway officially once we have a few more members in the audience here. So
I made my screens.
Poppy, you are officially the first person in the chat room. I wish I had a prize. Duchess will blow you a kiss.
Okay.
So we are suffering in silence here in not quite Apple country. Let me peer into the powers that be and see if I can get you an official reading as to the barometer. So okay, so it appears that it is 86 degrees out.
Oh.
And on my eastern side of the old abode here, I am just waiting for my studio to start cooling down. And the Duchess is joining us from her new compound, and she'll tell us a little bit more about that in a bit. Duchess, how are you doing with, finding all of your wings and wongs and widgets and wadgets?
I am doing pretty good. I am not seeing what Cleo suggested we could see.
Huh. Because I know you had told me about something resembling a chat room. I'm only aware of there being comments on videos that are posted.
Yeah.
So the Duchess was just asking me about the YouTube presence that we have going on.
So I think Cleo was wrong.
Possibly, or if she's looking at it on her phone, she might have been under the impression it was a chat room, whereas it's just comments.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I would have to ask her more about it. She said she was going to show it to me, but of course, she got distracted and I got distracted, and then we weren't in the same room anymore.
So I don't know if you noticed, but when you entered into the chat room, the chatterbot introduced itself as Dante and said that it would be our bartender.
Oh. Well, and what is he bringing us?
I would like to know, because, if Dante is anything like Guinan on Star Trek, he might have some interesting stories to share.
Well, that too. But does he actually talk to us?
Only when you come into the room. He's sort of he's sort of the bouncer. I think he just clicks off to make sure we're not at occupancy.
Well, and how would they know if we're at occupancy?
I don't think we're in danger of finding out anytime soon. So, Toppy, I'm sure that by now you are probably hearing us. So, my worries about settings changing probably are nil at this point. So, yes. So, Duchess, if the bartender is serving right now, what would you like to order?
Well, what I have with me is a latte and coffee. Or not a latte and water, excuse me. Not coffee. But coffee would be okay.
I have a lemon ginger tea.
Oh, yeah. Toppy wants something real in terms of drinks.
Yes, well, it's possible Toppy may have just come home from work too, so that's allowed.
Well, yes, that is. And I am not sure I have ever tried a Harvey Wallbanger.
I know, or at least I think that there's orange juice in it, but I think I get Harvey Wallbangers and screwdrivers confused with each other.
Well, screwdrivers are vodka and orange juice, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But I don't know what's in a Harvey Ballply near me because I've never had one and I've never known anybody order one.
No idea what's in one.
That's good, Toppy.
You just know that if it's presented well, right? So if your drink has to have a slice of fruit in it, both Toppy and Duchess, you could answer here now. At first, I will say what I would order, at least what I used to order when I was first going to bars with my now ex. My first legal drink was a rum and coke, and there was a little bit of a father-son complex going there because one of the bars that I was taken to first by him was one of those men's clubs, and I don't mean the kind that has women dancers. I mean the old-fashioned kind that probably raises money for charities and whatnot. But the charter of their organization was basically women should stay barefoot and pregnant and in the kitchen.
Yeah, well, they were wrong.
Right. Woohoo! We have another member in the chat room. We are joined by Gavin.
Yay! And also #1 Chinese kitchen.
Oh, I would take a fair guess that's probably Jim.
Well, he apparently doesn't want to reveal his other identities, so I'm going to just call him Chinese Kitchen.
So we're just going to wait a couple of more minutes here before we get started so that we'll be right at a even 5:10 just for good luck.
Kicks.
Yes, and actually that reminds me I need to adjust the timers as well then if we're going to do this that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's 1. And that's 2. And let's get the third one here. Actually, it should be more than 5 minutes because we're 10 minutes in, so let me fix that. Okay. He's starting momentarily here, folks. Today is a very special episode. We're going to be talking about memories of fall and going back to school.
And that's an excellent thing to do.
Mm-hmm. So let's see. I think I'm getting this right. Okay, that is where it's at. Alrighty, folks. Thank you for joining us for our September live show. And to show our appreciation, we're going to give you a little teaser here. Something we've whipped up for season 3. And away we go.
When I was a child, I met a man in a funny hat. He made me laugh, and we were fast friends. Time flew by, and it's now many years later. Each time I put on his hat, I am magically transported back to the days of my youth.
Out in the far away, nearby.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Duchess Sue.
Greetings, peasants.
Good to see you. It's been a while.
It has.
How are you?
I am doing quite well, I think. I have just recently moved. It has been very exhausting. We moved out of a place that had bed bugs, which are a terrible thing to deal with.
Well, before you continue on, Duchess, we will intro that segment.
Okay.
But I was saying to our audience a moment ago that it is a fairly warm day out here in not quite Apple Country. It's about 86, sunny, and I'm suffering in silence here as the room is cooling off and the sun is going away. I would guess that you're probably faring a little better there, though. You're in a modern place, aren't you?
I am in a modern place. I have air conditioning, but it's very warm outside.
I see. Well, then, without further ado, we will go ahead and start talking about our weeks.
Okay.
Even the bad times are good. Soon as I get to you, baby, you just gotta hold me, and even the bad times are good.
Okay, milady, you started us off by telling us that you have recently relocated your abode, and our listeners are just aching to find out, how did things go, and are you finally settled in?
Well, we aren't quite settled in. We have the old apartment for until the end of the month. Because we are moving out of an apartment that has bed bugs, which is not recommended by the professionals that deal with bed bugs. But because of that, we have had to treat everything before it was moved. And just in case, we are treating everything after it's moved. So we are steaming all the wooden furniture. We got rid of all the soft furniture. So we have a brand new bed, which is one of the adjustable beds, sort of like a hospital bed, which is really comfortable. We spent a fair amount of money for it, but it's really comfortable. So we are going to get a new sofa and that kind of stuff, but we haven't quite done that yet. Also, our kitchen chairs had to go.
Oh.
Well, they had padding on them, and I didn't want to replace that because I'm not as strong as I used to be. Oh, we're getting interesting things here. Anyway, so that's been pretty tedious. It's because we have no dressers at the moment. We will have those probably Friday of next week. The movers are coming Monday. They will move things into our garage here. And then we are putting up some very poisonous strips of things we got from Amazon that are only supposed to be sent to professional pest control people. I love Amazon. They just will send you anything.
And suddenly the Duke is certifiable.
That's true. Well, he's always been certifiable, but we won't talk about that. So we will put that in the garage with those things, and then they will have to air out that has to be done for 3 days, and then they have to air out for another 3 days. So that is sort of our situation, but we are slowly but surely getting moved in. I have almost all my dishes here. We are washing all of those in really hot and scalding hot water, just in case the bed bugs decided that they wanted to lay eggs or something on some of our dishes. But I really didn't want to get rid of that. And we got rid of all the food that was in boxes because I wasn't sure. And things like flour, or bags of flour and sugar and stuff. So we're having to put together almost a complete kitchen.
Oh boy!
If
the Shy Yeti were visiting, I would say that you could probably borrow a spacesuit or two from his alien kit, because it sounds like you need a hazmat team.
Well, yeah, I mean, the professionals suggest that you don't move until you get rid of the bed bugs, because there's a danger of moving them with you. And because of that, I really, we wanted to make sure that we didn't move them with us, and that's why we've gone to all this effort. And it's just really, it's been a really exciting time. But we told the new landlord that we were coming from a place with bed bugs, because I had an argument with the real estate people who are managing the apartment complex. I think that particular place is run by an absentee landlord.
Oh.
And they're saying, well, that's the tenant's responsibility to do that, to take care of that. But what they have suggested professionally is that in really old complexes like that, you need to treat not only that apartment, but the other apartments as well. It could be that it came from some other apartment. I have no idea how they got to our house. But there has been an epidemic of bed bugs in the United States for the past 5, maybe 10 years.
Now, if I remember correctly, when we were talking the other day, you mentioned to me that it's possible that this problem may have existed in the building before you moved in.
Yes, when you went out to take the garbage out, every once in a while, you'd see mattresses and stuff out there marked bed bugs.
And didn't you say something to me about the process that they normally follow when somebody moves out?
Oh, well, yeah, they when I talked to the representative, she said she was going to start showing the apartment like the day after. They take the first month after you say that you're going to leave, and they tell you that they can show the apartment, and that was in the lease. But I said, are you really going to show the apartment while there's still bed bugs in there? And they didn't. She didn't say anything to that. So I have reported this to the health department, and I understand I should also report it to the Department of Building and I can't remember what the other thing is, but it's a city department, some other authority, because the health department said they'd send them a letter. And I'm sure that's really going to move her.
Well, I hope for one that she gets a paper cut opening it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think she was really concerned. I'm not sure that she knows what to do. She says that she has not had bed bugs in the building since 2010 or 12 or something. But even so, I think you keep checking on those things, because bed bugs have not a lot to do with your hygiene and stuff, but they have a lot to do with just coming around.
Now, I've seen a lot of sites that provide review services, and they have them not only for restaurants and whatnot, but also for apartments. If I were you, I would see if you could go out and find a site that mentions your old place and warn the people that are considering.
But yeah, I believe I will do that. It's just that there are so many things that I've had to attend to. Of course, there's the regular stuff of moving, changing addresses and things. And I subscribe to some products from a company called the Grove Collective, and they're a nature preservation organization, and they sell these products to help fund their cause.
Okay.
And I didn't get their my address changed with them, and so they are sending this to the other
new
address. No, they aren't sending it to the new one. They're sending it to the old apartment, and I hope it gets there before our official before the end of the month, because that's officially when we let go of the apartment.
Right. Yeah. I was gonna say to the new people that you guys held on to the place for a little bit. The last time I moved, it was from a townhouse to our house we bought, and there was a little bit of a drive, but we also held on to the place for a bit. And I can tell you, after a week of going back there and cleaning, I just wanted to be done with it because it felt like we were going to a special effort. And I kept telling hubby, it was like, let's just find out what it costs to have a maid come in here or something, because I'm just sick of coming here the opposite direction of home to clean this place up just to make sure we get our deposit back.
Yeah.
So
I'm not going to, I'm guessing that I was really short with Kimberly, is her name, and she did not appreciate that a whole lot. But I just, she says, well, this is a tenant's responsibility. But the Duke found a posting in our local newspaper from several years ago when they were talking about this, and they're going, well, both the tenant and the landlord have a certain amount of responsibility in this, but when people have gone to court over this, the landlord almost always loses.
So I was going to ask you, Duchess, before we took our break and you mentioned that you were going to be moving, you also talked about your granddaughter, Cleo, who she does a YouTube channel with called Bits and Bobs. You had mentioned that Cleo might possibly be moving in with you in the Duke. Now, what became of that?
I don't know. There's still a possibility, but Mom and Dad are kind of not interested, or they're kind of talking her out of it. They have, especially Mom, has a strange effect on her two girls. Mama Bear she set expectation for the girls. They weren't to get involved with boys until they were out of high school. They weren't supposed to they were supposed to go get their 4-year degree before they could get married, or and the youngest child started dating when she was in high school. She went to a magnet school regarding science, and she met this really cool kid, and they started dating, and Mom couldn't really do anything about it. Also, though she discouraged her, and she tried to tell her that this young man is a terrible person, and maybe he is or maybe he's not. I can't quite figure that out. I haven't spent enough time with him.
Right. Now, when you say magnet school, is that like a school for advanced placement or gifted students?
It's a, not necessarily, but it's a school that is, it's you go to that from your regular high school. You're assigned a high school, and then you apply to get in. You have to have some reason to go to that school. Now I think we have 3 different magnet schools, and there's a liberal arts school, and there's a science school, and I can't remember what the other one is.
Is it considered like a private school, like a charter school?
No, it's part of the county school system.
I see.
The school she went to, because it's science, it's science oriented, and they had to find places that the school district could afford to rent or what have you. And so the science program was held in the zoo, the the local zoo, and they called it the zoo school. So, but she got her diploma was from the school she transferred from, or and I think she took 2 classes there in the morning before she went over to the zoo school.
Mm-hmm.
So when
now
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, for our listeners' benefit, it should be mentioned that Mama Bear has another child who has moved in with their boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
So it's entirely possible that Mama Bear's efforts with Cleo are in an effort to try to keep her at home still.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that's true. But to indicate the power that Mama Bear has over these girls, they both wanted to go to university. They both applied to a number of schools, but in the long run, we went to the local university, which is not a bad university, and it's a flagship of the state's university system. But she talked her girls into going to the local one, and the youngest girl almost made it to Nicholls State in Louisiana, but not quite. It suddenly became, just before she left for Nicholls State, it became too expensive, and she'd have to take out too many loans. But they're taking out the same number of loans at the local university, and after a year, well, when they started, Mama Bear didn't like their choices of what they wanted to study. So Cleo went into engineering first. And Red, who is really interested in animals, wanted to study marine sciences, went into something, I don't know, physics or something. Those were their declared majors. Well, Cleo did not get along well with a number of the classes required in engineering. And so both the girls at this point changed their major to physics or chemistry. No, it wasn't physics, it was chemistry. And
was that something Mama Bear approved of? Yeah,
because you can. And this whole thing is, we should get a degree. And Toppy has said, I think I would have made a good scientist, a good mad scientist.
I could see you in a lab coat.
Anyway, so Mama Bear is pushing things that pay money. That she thinks pay money. Well, after they both didn't do both decided that chemistry was not where it was at, and after I suggested to them that they would probably end up working in a lab where they were like a medical type lab, where they were checking to see if people had been using drugs, and they were checking things like feces to see what was wrong with people. And
yeah, like a draw station.
Yeah, that's what most of the chemists that I knew ended up doing. Now, if you can find a research place at a university, then that's not as bad as that. Or if you can find a research place in Dow Chemical or something, that's not as bad. But there are a limited number, and since Mama Bear took Cleo out of the Clea wanted to go into archaeology, and she wanted to study Egyptology. Now, that is not a well-paying job.
It's a very specific field, and I would imagine you'd be lucky to find an opportunity in it.
Yeah, there are. It's rather hard, and even if you can, it's not very. It doesn't pay a lot of money unless you're really lucky.
Right. It's like teaching. A large aspect of the career is the experience and what you make of it. It doesn't pay well, but there are plenty of people out there who that's their passion. Sort of like being an artist or an actor. The lucky ones are the ones who get discovered and have an opportunity that pays well. But the vast majority of those people are those who are just surviving and hoping to enjoy their day.
Yeah, it's true. I think I'm being boring because I think we've lost some people out of our chat room.
Oh, well, so before we move on to my week, Duchess, I happen to notice that you have a little friend behind you there.
I do.
Would you tell a little about her?
This is my giraffe. She followed the Duke home from one day, and so we have adopted her, and we have been calling her Giraffe, but I don't think that's a very good name. So we would like people to suggest another name.
Oh, that's a very good idea. So for our listeners, both in the chat room as well as those who are enjoying this later on, the Duchess is looking for names for her new pet. So if you'll email us at tfnpodcast@gmail.com, or heck, if you want to friend the Duchess on Facebook, she is TFN Sue Duchess. Post something on her page and tell her what you have in mind for her friend's new name.
That would be nice. I'd like something a little esoteric or out of the way, something that is not just
Mainstream.
I don't know what. Yeah.
Something is, some sort of a whimsical name that might have been a nickname for a friend in college, or your friend's name for the night at the bar.
Well, that too.
The topic is asking if it's a kitty hat, but I see that you've let him know it's not.
Yeah, it's not a kitty cat.
It's a sophisticated hat, whichever it is. Is it your riding hat, madame? Do you wear that when you're side saddle?
Well, yeah, that's true. But
well, we'll go ahead and move on from there. It has been an eventful summer for Billy and I. We've had a few family events that we've attended, had some adventures, so I'll just tell you a little bit about that. So what would you like to know first, Duchess?
Well, you went to family events. What kind of family events? You had like a large variety of them, or maybe a small variety.
Well, over the course of the summer, I had 2 different family reunions, and these are organized by my mom's only living sister, my Aunt Gwen, and she does these reunions in touch with their cousins. These are family members that she used to see every other summer when her parents were alive, my grandparents. So we attended a couple of reunions. Now, hubby didn't get to attend one of them, which actually ended up being the shorter, or smaller rather, of the 2 turnouts. The first of the reunions was for my grandmother's side of the family. And coincidentally, I had recently discovered, and I may have mentioned this briefly before, but I've learned of a cemetery not far from where my mother grew up. And it was for my grandfather's side of the family. And this happens to be part of my family history, that there are gaps in my research. So, to my surprise and delight, I learned that this cemetery had connections with the previous records that I was able to find for my ancestors. So now I have a link because all of the males of that family were on the census in Vermont when my ancestors were born. So there's a high chance that that is actually my grandfather's family. So, and then a couple of weeks later, we had a reunion for that side of the family down in Pennsylvania. We went to a lovely area called Colton Point State Park. Very picturesque. There's a canyon there. It's in a wooded area, and unfortunately for my aunt Gwen, she had a little difficulty getting there. I think she hadn't been there in a while. And it was kind of ironic because my uncle Chris, I've mentioned, who's married to sort of a flower child, and he went to seminary school himself, but he never became a minister because his wife didn't want to be a pastor's wife.
I can't imagine why.
Right. But my uncle Chris showed up at this reunion, and he was actually there before Aunt Gwen, which really must have esteemed her because he's the family member that doesn't often turn up. And so here I am at the reunion with my husband, meeting some of my cousins, and probably paying a little bit more attention than I did when I was a kid because I realized, these are people who knew my grandfather when they were younger. And in fact, some of them had some cute stories I'll get to in a moment. But yeah, my aunt shows up, and my uncle was already there for some time. And I don't think she could have had a worse day because I'm sure she's gone through life with her brother always being the last one there. So, but it was a fun reunion, and I was glad that I went. My sister Betty and Ronnie didn't show. My sister Betty made up an excuse that she was getting ready for a friend's wedding, but the real story was that she was not happy with our aunt's reaction to a gift she gave her. She thought that it would have had a warmer reception, so she was trying to teach her a lesson. You know, that's yeah. So, but we had a good time nonetheless. Yeah, and like I said, I met some cousins who had some nice stories. In fact, one of them told me a story about when my grandfather was a younger man because her dad was my grandfather's brother, so he was their uncle. And he told me that when my grandfather was a young man, he used to hit his brothers up for money when he'd want to go out on a date. So I thought that was rather cute, and
I don't know how cute it is. I bet his brothers didn't think it was cute.
Well, I'm sure not, but it's a charming story to learn.
Yes.
That your elders try to teach you certain things, and they didn't necessarily learn from an example. But anyways, my cousin told a nice story about how my grandparents might have possibly met, which I had never heard before. And apparently, my grandfather might have been working at a jewelry store that repaired watches just down the street from the diner that my grandmother worked in as a young lady. So I hadn't heard that story before. It was quite cute. And one of the cousins also talked about how she married into a family that owned a bakery. So she and hubby traded notes on recipes, and they talked about how, things like Depression era recipes are such rare gems because it's from an age when we cooked differently and we used things that we don't today. But when you try to replicate the outcome, they don't always turn out because there are little secrets here and there. And they said that one of the tricks to turning out things or Depression era is to use, when you have a recipe that calls for either baking soda or baking powder, use half baking soda, half baking powder, because apparently today's ingredients are stronger. So, but we also just last weekend had a nice little getaway. Hubby and I went off to what Baron Frosty likes to call the Naughty Boy Camp. And it was an all-male campground. And we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. It was nothing like the bathhouses that I went to with my ex a couple of times when I lived in a bigger city. It was quite peaceful. And there was a road there that basically there are people who are patrons here that enjoy being in nature. So in certain areas of the campground, clothing is optional.
Yeah.
Now, I was entirely comfortable with that. We didn't participate, but we did have neighbors that on Saturday morning, looking out our window, got up to some antics. And I think that they were friends with their neighbors because it looked like a little bit of theater. Somebody tiptoed across the driveway and pretended to be stealing a piece of wood from their stack. And then after the person had crossed the street, the naturist couple there got a tablecloth or something that was red, put it over their heads, and gestured like they were Little Red Riding Hood, and they were crossing the street to go after the wood that was stolen from them.
It sounds like a good time.
Yes, we originally reserved just a tent space, but we were fortunate enough that they had a cancellation, so a cabin became available. Now, this wasn't a any sort of a great accommodation. It was basically a bedroom with a kitchenette and a little porch, but it was a welcome shelter from the elements. The mosquitoes there, they were the size of dragonflies. And I thought they were dragonflies until Hubby Billy took a look and said, "No, that's a mosquito. And if you know what's good for you, stay on the porch." We also entered.
Didn't you take bug spray with you or anything?
Oh, we did.
To go
but,
out.
You have to wonder if the chemistry is quite right from something from the Jurassic period. But there was a costume contest Saturday night. It gets close to the end of the camping season, so they have a preemptive Halloween party for their regular guests. And I'll talk about that a little bit here, but we also went to a family wedding, and my brother Jughead's prom night baby basically was getting married, and we were excited about this because, well, let's just say he's the blue collar type, and the young lady that he married is a college professor. Although my brother did show up for the wedding, I'm thinking because it was open bar. Yes. So it's funny how things work out when you tell people you have somewhere else you need to be. This particular wedding seemed to drag on, and dinner was supposed to be like 5 o'clock. I think it was more like almost 6, and it wasn't until 7:30ish that they got around to cutting the cake. And I think the staff at the venue didn't know what they were supposed to do because they waited forever after they cut the cake to bring it out. And a lot of places, you have your food brought to you, but no, this was out on the table. You were supposed to go and get it. So we're waiting for the cake. Meanwhile, it's getting dark out and we need to be back to our campground, which is at least 40 to 45 minutes away. And my siblings are trying to get me to stick around for family pictures because my drunken brother is having too much fun talking to everybody and keeps forgetting that he's been asked to form a group to get a picture. So finally, we ended up giving up, and we left telling them, "You take a picture with him and we'll just put us in it later or something," because it's ridiculous. I mean, We didn't even get back to the campground until within an hour of when we were supposed to be at the costume contest.
Yeah.
And we had
So
to get our
did you
costume.
lose?
Well, we didn't win, but we did enjoy ourselves. It was just frustrating because we barely had enough time to get our costumes on. Now, for those of you who haven't already noticed, I did post the pictures on the Instagram page for TFN Podcast as well as my Facebook. Hubby Billy and I were inspired by the nature location. It was a wooded area, so we went as naughty woodland nymphs. And hubby was quite excited because it's been a while since he's made a costume, and that's something he used to enjoy.
And does he still enjoy it?
Yes.
Did he have fun doing that?
He did. Unfortunately, we are also beginning to feel our age because the day after we got home from being out all night on the dance floor, hubby was having trouble getting out of bed. So,
he's not going to the gym, is he?
He actually works out 4 times a week.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, so it's just a hereditary problem because his mother had bad knees, and I think his dad had a bad back. But
yeah.
we are.
He could get his knees replaced.
Yeah, we're on the layaway plan for that. So yes, we enjoyed ourselves camping, and it was so briefly but rudely interrupted by a family wedding. I'm glad that my nephew is happy in life now, but I just wish that the timing had been better with serving and whatnot. But we are looking forward to the remains of the fall, and we have some things going on in the spring here. Let's see. So we are just over halfway through our program today, and we're just going to take a brief break for our listeners. So let me...
That sounds like a good idea.
Let's see if I can find this here. Did I move it? Bear with me just a moment, folks. Okay, here we go.
The Faraway Nearby will soon be entering its 3rd season. If you've enjoyed listening to the adventures of DJ and the Duchess, why not show your support? Head on over to patreon.com/TFN podcast. There you can choose to make a donation. Who knows, maybe you'll get an invitation to the Royal Compound for a future episode. But whatever you do, make sure you let us know our time's been worth it to you. Thank you from the both of us.
And that ends the catching up on our weeks.
Even the bad times are good. Soon as I get to you, baby, you just gotta hold me, and even the bad times are good.
And before we go on to our topic of the episode, just wanted to catch up with the chat room. We still have Toppy Smelly and Gavin in the room. And Toppy has mentioned he looked at the pictures, the costumes, that they looked really great.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that, and the Duchess is saying she'd like to have hubby make her a costume. So we'll see what Santa's wish list brings. So we're going to go ahead and move into our topic of the week. Since it's September, we're going to talk about favorite memories of fall and going back to school.
When you get it right, that's the beauty of living my life. Hold on, baby, I'm taking you back to school.
All right, class, settle down, get to your seats. We're about to get started. So, Duchess, I was just wondering, since it is that time of year, do you have any memories of school, and do you have any favorite memories you'd like to share?
Well, elementary and high school were not very good to me. I started school in the first grade rather than going to kindergarten because they didn't have a kindergarten until the year after I started the first grade. And my first grade teacher was a friend of the family. I grew up in a town that had like 800 people, and everybody knew everybody. And my first grade teacher was a friend of the family, and I kind of liked her until she was my teacher. And then I was convinced that she hated me. And I'm certain that I hated her by the end of the school year. Well, we were, of course, you learn your alphabet and how to read and stuff, because when I went to first grade, you didn't learn all the interesting things like a little bit of algebra and what have you. You learned your letters, you learned how to read little tiny books, and then you got into chapter books at some point, or maybe not until the second grade. I don't remember exactly. But she convinced me that I couldn't read as fast as I thought I could, or that I was, and that I couldn't understand what I was reading. Now, she had taught my two sisters, who were not very academically inclined. She had not taught my older brother, who did his first grade in Oregon during the war, World War II. And he was very academically inclined. So she took her knowledge of my siblings and put it on me, which was really annoying. And I have a tendency to hold grudges, and I wanted to sue her when I was older, but then, of course, she died. She was an old lady even when I knew her, I think.
Oh.
So she died before I could get around to doing it. It took me a while to realize that some of my problems in school went all the way back to her.
Yeah.
She was a terrible person. I had one teacher in high school that I really liked. And when I dropped half of my classes in my senior year, because I didn't need them to graduate and I was really having problems going to school. So they allowed me to drop half of my classes, and I only went to school part-time. And when I did that, one of the classes I dropped was hers. And she actually gave me a copy of the textbook we used, because it was really good in explaining word usage and grammar and what have you. That was before I discovered Strunk and White, who were even better. But while I was in college, I lent that book to a friend who needed some help with some English papers, and I never got the book back. So the friend that I had that always bought 2 copies of books so he could lend one out, in case they didn't get it back, he still had a copy of the book, was a smart person. I just decided that I wasn't lending books to anybody that I didn't really trust.
Right, because you're not going to get it back.
Yeah, because I don't know if I'll get it back. If I lend them to somebody that has like been a friend for years and years and years, and I know that they're good about doing that, or doing things that they say they will do, I might lend them books. I'd lend DJ a book.
No, it's interesting that you mentioned that one of your first teachers was a friend of the family. I had sort of a reverse experience. Now, I'm a year's baby, so I was already older than my classmates when it came time for school, but I was also held back a year because I had hearing problems due to allergies, severe allergies. And, lo and behold, the lady who was my first grade teacher ended up being a down the street neighbor a few years later when we moved. And I became friends with her son, who might have been maybe 4 or 5 years older than me. And we were in a fan club together. And I just thought it funny because years later now, I sometimes will talk about school and how unknowingly she was mean to me, not realizing the problems I had in her class were due to physical ailments. And, well, let's just say that nowadays they agree that she had a little bit of a mean streak in her. And coincidentally, I did attend kindergarten. In fact, in my small town, we not only had kindergarten, but we had sort of a precursor to pre-kindergarten, pre-K. And at the time, they called it story hour. And in my neck of the woods, it was one of those. I think it was an afternoon event. So, it wasn't something where you got on the bus in the morning and you stayed all day. But I distinctly remember in kindergarten having trouble learning my colors. And it wasn't until I was in junior high that we had a psychology class, and one of the sections of the textbook reviewed the concept of color blindness. Now, I became the class freak at that moment because it seemed like nobody else in the room had the problem with the charts that were in the textbook. And so apparently I was the only one in there that had a degree of color blindness. So I have to wonder what that teacher would have thought if she knew.
Well, actually, you may not have been the only person. They just wouldn't perhaps have admitted to it.
Mm-hmm.
And did you tell the teacher that you had a problem seeing colors
I think
or differentiate colors?
I think at the point where I learned it, I think she was no longer teaching because she was an older lady.
Mm.
But everyone had nicknames for her because she was a little bit cranky, and she also wore these sort of orthopedic shoes that had a platform to them. And so I think I remember my kindergarten teacher was actually referred to as the Wicked Witch of the West by some of the kids.
But wasn't the Wicked Witch of the West? Oh, she was the evil one.
Right. Now, also in that same classroom, in my kindergarten class, there was a boy who was sort of a troublemaker. And you know how they try to get children to take naps in school? Well, I didn't like to take naps. And my sisters had trouble getting me to take them when I was little. But in school, we had these mats that we would place on the floor when it was nap time, and you got to choose who you were going to take your nap near. And I used to choose to have my mat near the troublemaker because he would keep little matchbox cars in his pockets. And when the teacher was doing God knows what at her desk in the front of the room with the cars. Now, of course, many, many years later, we never stayed in touch, of course. I think he probably even changed schools before we graduated. But come to find out, that young man was in the paper for one of the reasons you probably don't want to be. Let's just say it was a tryst, and he may have done some time. So interesting things that occur in small towns.
I think they occur in big towns too. It's just nobody thinks of crime in small towns. Small towns
Right.
are idyllic and not they don't have crime and stuff.
Yeah,
Except
I mean,
they do.
yeah, the small town is where you raise your family so that they are all, safe and in a fairy tale world.
Well, and
So,
and there's some rationale to that because if you know everybody in town, then, I mean, we couldn't do anything in town without our parents knowing about it before we got home. So, because everybody, all of the parents watched out for other people's children, and all of the busybodies and cranky old people watched them and got really annoyed with a lot of things they did. I remember there was a lady down the street that if we were playing kickball or baseball or something out in the street, which we did frequently, because there wasn't enough traffic to bother us too much. If there was a car came by, we picked up the bases and went to the side and waited for them to get through, and then we'd put it back. But if the balls accidentally landed in this lady's yard, I was the only person allowed to go get it, because for some reason she really liked me. And I think that's because I was a frightened little girl. I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. And I was shy, and so I was really cute. And I don't know, I was one of her favorite people. But by the time I was in the 5th grade, I realized that she was something of a hypocrite. She went to church every Sunday, and she had all these high moral beliefs, but she didn't really practice them when she got home. And it was, there were kids out in the street being noisy, which kids are. And when I was a child, we didn't have electronic games or anything. We had board games, and your parents threw you out of the house. and in the summer, we frequently were outside from after breakfast until dark, because when the sun went down, it was time to go home. And they didn't worry too much about you. So I'm surprised we never lost anybody.
Yeah. So, of course, we could come up with all sorts of stories about mean teachers and pranks and whatnot that happen in school, because these are the things that happen when you're a child. You're awkward and trying to figure out how to act in a situation. But do you have any favorite memories of school? Were there things that were fun that you did, or did you have a teacher that had certain activities that made class special?
No.
No?
I didn't like anything about elementary school or high school. The only good thing I liked about high school was the English teacher. And I was kind of sorry to drop her class, but I didn't need it. And it sort of, it just made sense for me to drop her class. But she told us at the beginning of the semester that I was there that if we ever wanted to turn an assignment in with a poem, you could. But she wasn't going to ask anybody to write a poem. And there were a couple of assignments I actually did turn in as poetry, and she was kind of impressed with that. Not that I like poetry very much, or I'm a good poet.
Well, you have to appreciate acts of expression.
Yeah, and she was very, very pleased that I at least made a try of it, and that turned out pretty well. Although one of them she thought was an outline for the paper, and I'm going, no, this is a whole thing. It was about tolerance. And
well, I had a few teachers that made things fun. Now, coincidentally, the teacher who ended up being my down the street neighbor, she was somebody who was a little creative in her classroom. She took all sorts of bottles and containers from home, washed them out, and she cut them so that they were hollow and they were sort of like toys.
Mm-hmm.
She brought them into her classroom. And so one of the things you could do is you could take this box of bottles and you could pretend that you had a little chemistry lab. You could be a mad scientist.
Oh, wow. That's and what grade was that?
It was first grade. And another teacher had some blocks, which, at the time, we didn't have a lot of Lego blocks in school because, of course, they were expensive when they were first new. But this teacher had taken a bunch of building blocks of various shapes and had attached some of those snaps that you have like on pairs of jeans.
Yeah.
And she had attached them to the blocks. She had nailed them into the blocks so that you could connect the blocks using the snaps.
Yeah.
So that was
that's kind of interesting. Were they regular blocks? I mean, like wood blocks?
Yeah, they were little wooden building blocks, and she had just taken a bunch of snaps and had nailed them to it so that you could attach them to each other. Really creative, if you ask me. And let's see, we had at one point in school, I have a rather unique memory of my middle school experience because we moved a couple of times then.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, my folks had bought a temporary housing, a trailer for us to live in while they were building another house. And of course, we moved to the town my mother worked in just to realize within a couple of years that we didn't like it as well there, and we moved back. But part of it had to do with the school system because I had gone from a smaller town where all these students went to the same building, or relatively, they were all connected at least, to a town where the various stages of school were in different buildings across town from each other. So I wasn't very happy because I couldn't see my siblings during the school day. And, well, I may or may not have caused myself to get a little attention because I couldn't see my siblings. So at one point in time, I'd been sent to the principal's office, and I swear the guy was never there. And, what are you going to do when you go to the principal's office and their assistant tells you, you need to go back? I think I remember pretending that I had gotten disciplined, so I acted all sad. But yes, and the only other time I remember going to the principal's office, he ended up actually being there, much to my surprise. And
what did he do?
Well, this was for a different reason. In fact, at this point, I had written either a little short story or a poem that my teacher had liked. So she told me to go to the principal to read it to him. And, unbeknownst to him, I'd been there before for much different reasons. But this time, he had a dish of candy on his desk. I think it was Reese's Pieces. So I left the principal's office with a handful of Reese's Pieces. In fact, I think I was a little bit greedy. I think I got a Kleenex and I filled my pocket. But another great memory that I have of my middle school experience was we had a hill that was real close to the school. And I remember one year we had such a great snowfall during the school day, that they had decided to make it a school event, that the kids were going to be allowed to bring their sleds to school, and that we would spend at least part of the day outside sliding down the hill. And our teacher made hot cocoa, and I remember that was the first time I had marshmallow fluff in my cocoa.
You had a much better school than I ever had. I never liked my teachers. They didn't like me. They always thought that I was lying about stuff. Mm-hmm. When I was in the third grade, I was sitting as far away from the blackboard as you could sit, and I asked the teacher if I could move to the front of the class because I couldn't see, and she said, "No, you just want to get up there so you can sit by your best friend." And I'm going, "No, I can't see." You're writing stuff on the board and there's nothing there. I know you're writing stuff on the board, but I can't see it. And I went home and told my mother, and I went to an eye doctor and showed up with glasses a couple of weeks later.
Mm-hmm.
Because I couldn't see.
Right. Now, I know that you didn't, but from the way you describe your early school experience, it almost sounds like you went to Catholic school.
No, I didn't, but I never got along with my teachers, and they did not get along with me. I think partially I was smarter than they thought I should be, and that was wrong. I couldn't be as advanced as I was. I didn't, unlike my brother, sit down and read an encyclopedia. I did occasionally read parts of dictionaries. They're pretty fascinating. You go look up a word, and then there's other words around it that are interesting. But I was not as boring as my brother. I mean, he read just really strange stuff. And I read normal stuff. And he read all the books in the children's library at the town next to us. And I never did that. I got really bored with him. And I wanted to read books from the adult library. And my mother finally said, "Well, if you take this book home, and if you can read it and tell me about the story, then you can check out books." I had to use somebody else's library card because I was still too young, and I managed to read books at the adult library, and she didn't understand why I couldn't content myself with reading all of the books in the children's library. And I'm going, they aren't interesting. They are the most boring books in the world. I mean, I went through a large number of books, and they were kind of interesting, but then I got through those, and they didn't get any more new ones.
Well, for what it's worth, although you had a somewhat mediocre young school experience, I credit the good teachers that I had from what I believe is probably your generation, because some of my best teachers were people who had seen something of life and had been in the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
So I think that your generation led to some of the best teachers I had.
Well, that could be, and I noticed on YouTube, since Cleo has introduced me to it, and I've started looking at different things, I have tuned into a couple of teachers who are really interesting. It seems like, at least my favorite YouTuber is a teacher. She goes by the name of her show is A Pocket Full of Primary. And she's taught second and third grade for the first 2 years of teaching. She's only like 23 or 24. And she is fascinating.
Okay.
She does this blog of her week, and it's about an hour long, but I love to watch it because she talks about what she does for school, and she talks about her life, and it's almost like a storybook.
Yeah. Well, Madame, we are at our hour mark, so I'm just going to go ahead and move into this last segment, and you and I will hang out for a few minutes afterwards.
Okay.
I've got to feed my putties before I come back for Gavin's show. So we are going to go ahead and move into another segment. There is a special event on this weekend. In fact, tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern, a new chapter of the Star Trek universe is about to launch, Star Trek Discovery. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes here. Is that volume okay, Duchess?
I believe so.
Okay, so I'm going to talk for a few minutes here about the new Star Trek Discovery that is airing on CBS. Now, a lot of people are disappointed because they won't be able to watch it on Netflix. It is a streaming program. However, our listeners have a unique opportunity to see the first episode on broadcast television, if you still have access to it, tomorrow night on CBS at 8 p.m. Eastern will be the pilot of Star Trek Discovery titled The Vulcan Hello. Now, I know that for at least the moment, Duchess, you don't have plans to uh, watch the program, but what do you know about Star Trek Discovery? Have you heard anything?
I have not read much about it or heard much about it. I don't know. We haven't figured out our budget yet.
Mm-hmm.
And because we have to replace all this furniture and what have you, it's part of the reason why I'm not going to be subscribing to it.
That's okay. So, do you know much about the storyline behind it?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and fill you in. So, the last Star Trek series, Star Trek Enterprise, ran from about 2001 to 2005 ish. So, it's been 12 years since there was a Star Trek television series on the air. So, this is a very important time for fans because we're at a juncture where if we don't get behind this effort and show support, there may not be another installment in the Star Trek universe for quite some time. I mean, just from the history on its own right now, 12 years ago, since there was last a TV show, yes, there have been movies, but they've received mixed response. And because of the astronomical expense involved in making movies, a company like Paramount is not apt to produce another unless they can show a profit. So unless we get behind Star Trek Discovery, if you are a fan, it may be even longer than 12 years before the folks at Paramount and CBS decide to take a chance and see if people will spend their hard earned money to appreciate this program. Now, I've sort of, in part, mentioned before to our listeners that Star Trek has a special place in my heart. I grew up with a stay at home dad, and he enjoyed movies like some people enjoy books. He had a learning disability, so movies were his books. And about the time I was in high school, I was shown Star Trek 4, and the Star Trek The Next Generation series was on TV at the time. And it just opened a whole new world for me because I wasn't close with the majority of my classmates. And when I saw an ad for a local fan club during a marathon of the original Star Trek, this happened to be at the time of the 25th anniversary of Star Trek and a new movie was coming out. I met a group of people who, for years, were a second family to me. Now, the Duchess herself is also aware of this because for a number of years, she and I ran a fan club together, and she was actually one of our most active members. She was my ship's counselor. So, of course, it was not a very hard decision to invite her to this program because she pretty much was my right arm. But it's very important that fans show their support for this program because, again, it was 12 years ago that there was last any Star Trek on television. So if we don't at least tune in to see whether or not we like it, they're not going to develop any more stories. Now, I've been in different um, discussion groups, and there seems to be a cycle of fandom where people say things in their initial reaction, like, this is nothing like the old show. It can't be any good. How can it call itself Star Trek? And each installment in the Star Trek universe is different than the last. You can't possibly expect things to be the same all the time because no one's going to want to watch that. I mean, you have these movies that are remade over and over again, and it's not necessarily because people have run out of imagination. It's because the story was good enough that it can be told over and again. And people have different points of view, different takes on it. Well, what if we set this in the countryside in France? Or what if this was in the inner city and we have a ethnic family in the cast? Little things you can do to change the storyline. So now with Star Trek Discovery, they have chosen to change the storyline somewhat, whereas before you were following the adventures of a specific ship and a captain and their crew. In this story, we have a person who is sort of an orphan of war. The main character, Michael Burnham, was a child when her father was killed during a war. Her father was a Starfleet officer, and after she became an orphan, she was taken in as a ward by an influential family. She was taken in by Sarek, who was the ambassador of Vulcan, who later we knew as Spock's father. So here you have somebody who has lost their family due to war, and one of the most upstanding citizens of the Federation has taken their child in and has chosen to make sure that they had a good upbringing. And this child would later on be encouraged to apprentice under one of the most influential Starfleet officers of their time. One of the main characters of Star Trek Discovery is played by an Asian actress, and I'm trying to remember her name, but the character is Philippa Georgiou, and she is supposed to be one of the most prominent Starfleet officers of her time, and the main character of Michael Burnham is apprenticing under her in Star Trek Discovery. So it's a very different show, very interesting, a lot of elements to it. And the main character, who is a woman, is named after her father, Michael, which apparently was one of the producer or director's ideas. He has characters that are gender fluid, and what better way to promote a positive and hopeful future than to demonstrate that little idiosyncrasies like gender have less importance in the future, and you can have daughters who are named after their fathers and presumably sons who are named after their mothers.
Mhm.
So it is very important that if you are a science fiction fan, that you give Star Trek Discovery a try. And with that being said, the Duchess and I will go ahead and bid our fond adieus. Now, the next episode of The Faraway Nearby will have a very special guest. For those of you who may have paid attention, back in July, I guested on a science fiction podcast called The Starboard Power Coupling. And I will be returning in their next episode to review Star Trek Discovery once it's aired. So in return, we are inviting their very own Dr. Ken to join us for the next episode. So, Duchess, if you'll say good night, we will bid our listeners a fond adieu.
Well, it has been enjoyable. Thank everyone for stopping by. Um, hopefully, I think we missed acknowledging a couple people that were here, but we do appreciate your stopping by. You have a good 2 weeks, and we will see you again in the faraway nearby.
Okay. Thank you for listening to The Faraway Nearby.
Visit our webpage at tfnpodcast.com.
Find our fan page on Facebook and our companion blog on Tumblr.
This show is available on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher Radio.
Email us at tfnpodcast@gmail.com.
Follow us on Twitter at TFNDJ.
And call or text us at 720-230-6919. This show is a member of the Pride 48 Network.
Find other shows at pride48.com.
Okay, folks, for those of you who are listening on the streaming server, the Poke It With a Stick podcast will be up next at 7 p.m. So we are going to go ahead and drop off the stream here. Bear with me just a moment as I find all the doodads. Okay. That's dropped, and let me stop the broadcast.